Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining our YouTube live session. I'm really excited. Today, I have Javin Peterson here. He is the executive director and founder of Shepherd's Gate Health, which we will actually be hearing a lot more about. For the time being, while people start to join us, my name is Catherine Thomas. I am the executive director and founder of Yoga for Change. Yoga for Change is based in Jacksonville, Florida, with operations in South Florida, Tampa Bay, and Orlando, so across the state of Florida. What we do is we bring a trauma-informed yoga approach to individuals who have experienced something traumatic in their past, specifically veterans, youth, individuals who are incarcerated, and individuals who have mental health struggles. Because of COVID-19 and because of the racial unrest and all the injustices that we as an organization have been seeing, we saw that we were very secluded and not as inclusive as we wanted to. So that's why our board actually voted to open up our mission to include veterans, not just military veterans, but also first responders. And as opposed to being really focused on substance abuse disorder, people in recovery, we opened it up to people with mental health challenges. And so this kind of led to the way that I actually met Javin. Javin Peterson is he's currently actually active duty Air Force pilot. He's stationed in DC, and he'll talk about that in a little bit. But we met, I think, through the nonprofit center, through the nonprofit center of Northeast Florida. Highly recommend it. A lot valuable resources and education and great resource for our community. But the nonprofit center recommended that Javin reach out to because in Yoga for Change, because we have a lot of similar ways that we look at the community, and there's a lot of synergy there that they saw. So without further ado, please help me welcome Javin. Javin Peterson, if you don't mind, could you give a little bit brief sort of history of what has led you to the seat that you're currently in, including any education or anything that you kind of feel like is needed to sort of set the stage?
Yeah, you bet. Catherine, thank you so much for letting me be here and just kind of spend this time with you. So yeah, initially name's Javin Peterson, initially from Oak Park, Illinois, which is a suburb just outside west side of Chicago. So I grew up there, and then and just really cool experience. One thing that's really neat about Oak Park is it is a very diverse community. Um, and both in racial aspects as well as just even social economics. And so it's just a really neat place to kind of grow up and be able to develop a worldview there. And then it's funny because then from there I left at 18 and went to the Air Force Academy and did my undergraduate work there. And it was funny because there are just so many things that I often say when I was a kid, I felt like that I had a lot of the answers and none of the questions. And so being able to go to the academy allowed me to see that just because the world was a way that in which that I thought it was doesn't make it that way at all. In fact, there's probably about on any given day, there's probably, if I'm being generous with myself, there's probably 99.999% of stuff that I don't know. And so being able to engage with people from all over the country and in fact all over the world at the academy, because we have a lot of international students, allowed me to realize that even on my best day, even on my most generous day, what I actually know about anything, especially about somebody's experience, is far less than I should ever give myself credit for. And so being able to engage and learn about that, and so then taking that to pilot training. Like as you said, I'm a pilot in the Air Force by trade, and I've been doing that for about 20 years. We had an opportunity to live in small towns. Again, I came from Chicago, so a big city, and an opportunity to live in small towns in Texas and in Oklahoma, and then being stationed overseas in England, and we were also stationed in Florida for a bit, and then finally coming here to Washington D.C. and have an opportunity to serve with just an outstanding unit of airmen and officers that get to provide just outstanding service to our most senior national leaders, and being able to see, what does that look like? How does that team, again, from all of these different walks of life, come together and make these really challenging and complex things look very easy. But then again, knowing what's going on behind behind the curtain, if you will, to know all the work and teamwork and collaboration that goes into that.
And
And
sorry to
so,
interrupt you. Just, I think
yeah,
so. Who do you fly for? Like, who are some of the people that you personally are a pilot for? I think that would sort of
sure.
senior leadership people have an idea about that, but I think it'd be nice just to hear
You
what
bet,
you.
and it's all folks that you're familiar with. So, the Vice President of the United States, and I've done this under the last two administrations. So, the Vice President, the First Lady, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, chairman, joint chief of staff, and then attorney generals, and then just kind of as directed by the White House. So it's an opportunity to really see. At the most senior levels, again, nobody's coming up and asking me for my opinion, right? but very much to see how problems are approached, and who's sort of in the room when those decisions are being made, and how they're approaching those things, and being able to see that, which has been really cool, in two different administrations with two different ways of going about and considering problems, and how they solve those problems, and who it is that they bring around the table to hash those things out. So it's been a really cool experience, and it's allowed me and kind of to see that again. There are a lot of complex things going on in the world, but when you bring the right, not even the right, but when you bring people together, just in general, with different ideas from different backgrounds, that the best ideas work themselves to the top if you just choose to be engaged, if you choose to listen, and if you choose to observe. Those things really start to just gravitate themselves to where you have just an aperture that you otherwise wouldn't have. And so I think that's helpful in the work that we're trying to do with Shepherd's Gate Health.
Just a couple more questions about
Yeah.
what's it like flying? Like, how much do you just get a call that you're going to go fly someday, to this one spot, or are you given like an awareness? Just because, as me, when I was flying in the Navy as a helicopter pilot, the flight schedule comes out the night before and you go. And I think it's obviously a little different when you're doing high, national security, basically high value items in your aircraft with you,
Yeah.
obviously. So you've flown outside of this current billet, correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Is this the most stressful, you think, or is this least stressful?
Oh, good question. So I would say it's not to step on the toes of my friends in my previous communities. It's stressful in a different way. The stress that we had, I was previously a KC-135 pilot, and so when we did that, that was air refueling. And so, bringing two aircraft of different types together to connect, at 30,000 feet, 500 miles an hour, brings with it its own stress, right? And then you throw in there, what time of day it is, what kind of weather it is, whether you're in a combat environment or not. There's a stress that goes with that, and that is an exceptional amount of professionalism, an exceptional amount of being able to have an awareness of all of these different factors, and then throw in the fact that it may be multiple airplanes that are on your wing as you're doing this, and trying to keep all of that safe is certainly a stressor. And then you're on the, especially when you're deployed, you're on the 30th day, and you've already flown a couple hundred hours. You're like, this is crazy. But that being said, this stress is different, in the sense that you can't, like, that stress I can prepare for. I know what's coming on those days. I know what this refueling, I know what this is going to look like. I know what the threats are. I know what the adversaries may be doing. You don't know that when there's a schedule that changes based on how maybe a call or an interview or a tweet or a posting went, or something that was put out in the national, in a global paper. And that immediately affects the person that you're bringing on board that day. You may be planning to go to X, and then there was something changed, and now you're not going there anymore. And how do we make that quick change? Or something is which is really important, is also like just being on time. There are things that can affect that you're like, hey, there was like a whole party of national dignitaries at X country that were planning on us showing up at this exact time, and now because of some issues, maybe that we could control or not control, that's not happening. And now how is that going to be received in the realm of diplomacy? Your tardiness may have national security or international diplomacy ramifications, and so that's a different level of stress that we try to mitigate, obviously, that we try to over promise or under promise and over deliver on. But it's something that in my previous aircraft, when you park the jet whether you're on the road or you're at home, you kind of were able to forget about, that. That's not the case here. We say that the mission started before we left, and it's not over until we get back home. And you really do feel that. And so sometimes, to answer your first question, sometimes we do get a heads up, on hey, yeah, you're going to get a week, or to plan. Other days you don't. Other days it's launch and you're gone in a couple hours. But we approach it with the same level of professionalism, same level of planning that we can. Part of that is we're able to bring on probably some of the most experienced pilots in the Air Force to do this job. So we can, that allows us to sort of be able to absorb more. And we'll talk more about, like, grit and resiliency and absorption in that, but being able to absorb those external stressors in a way that doesn't, where it feels kind of normal, where you're able to process more information than necessarily being stressed out or burned out because one inject happened, and you're like, well, there goes the whole show.
So what do you do to de-stress in between, I guess, rides? But I mean, so just so our
Yeah.
whole YouTube audience knows, how many flights do you have left?
I took my last flight
There you go.
I just got home on the 3rd of July, which was really cool because it was the exact same day, 17 years prior, that I got home from my first combat deployment. So so I've been doing some reflecting, but that was just
Yeah.
one of the really cool things. But yeah, I had my last flight this weekend.
Well, thank you very much for your service and all sincerity. I am honored to know you. Our YouTube comments we're blowing up. Trevor Erickson says Lieutenant Colonel Peterson is one of the best officers I've ever worked with.
Thank you, Trevor. It's very kind.
Willa Peterson says, amazing interview, Javin. So proud to be your mom. My favorite Facebook comments are the ones my mom writes, oh, Catherine, good job.
Yeah,
so I always those mom shout outs are huge. I
yes,
think.
thank you, Mom.
Yeah.
She's a huge piece.
Yeah, exactly. So it's because of you, Mom, that we're all here.
That's right.
Just another one more question, just because, just wondering, what is one way that you de-stress in between, like, a high stress environment where you have to be calm and collected, behind, the stick or whatever when you're flying? What's one thing that you do in the aircraft, in the cockpit?
In the jet?
Yeah.
I would say probably what's nice. One thing that's really nice about the type of aircraft that I've had the privilege of flying is that they're all crew aircraft. So that means that there's someone else there, and in many cases there's a number of someone else's there. I remember when I was going through pilot training, like many folks, I was like, man, I really want to fly fighter aircraft, or I really want to fly bomber aircraft. And one thing that occurred to me sort of early on, and I think those jets are excellent. They're fun. I have a lot of friends that fly those. Many of them are single seat. Some of them are crew, but many of them are single seat. And one of the things that occurred to me when I was going through pilot training was, I think it would be neat to fly a fighter or a bomber, but I really think it'd be neat to fly with a crew, with some folks that have a vested interest in getting home safely. And so one of the things that I do, and that has helped me in stressful situations, I had one a couple months ago, and maybe I'll use this as an example. There wasn't anything necessarily about the flight that was going on that was stressful. The flight itself was pretty routine, but there were some injects that were coming in just from life. There was a situation going on with a really good friend of mine, and it wasn't very good. In some cases, it looked like it was very much life impacting, and to the point where we were concerned about his mental health, we were concerned about his physical health and his well-being, and would we be having a conversation with him later on that week? I talked to my crew about it, and I said, hey, I was like, man, I got a lot on my mind right now. And I typically will alternate legs. We'll alternate who flies, first and then second. And so my leg was coming up. I had flown in the right seat on the first leg and was making the radio calls and doing this, traditional co-pilot duties. And so it was my leg to fly home on the next one. And I said, hey guys, here's kind of what's going on. You guys have seen me. I've been, fortunately in our airplane, we also have Wi-Fi. So we're not disconnected. Which was good, which is mostly good, but I was also getting updates, right, from the family as to what was going on. And I alluded to the crew, like, hey, this thing's going on, wanted you to know, like, just, and so when it was my turn to fly, I said, hey, if you guys know that there's stuff going on, if if there's something that I do, just I want you to watch me. If there's something that I do that looks dumb, dangerous, or different, speak up. Don't hesitate to speak up. We're gonna get home. We're gonna land. Everything's gonna be great. But this thing is also weighing on my mind. And my flight engineer, who is an NCO or a non-commissioned officer, an enlisted member. I'm an officer, and so typically there is a rank dynamic that we have in the military. Officers outrank enlisted members and NCOs. But in this particular instance, and I think it's one, due to our training, two, it's also just due to the culture that we have in our community. Was he's like, hey boss, you know what? If that stuff's on your mind, why don't you just not fly this leg? Like, why don't why should we go and make a decision or have to curry something or weather through something, when we can just not even have the actual operation of the aircraft on your mind right now? The other guy is a good pilot. He flew us here. Like, you'll be fine. And it was really cool because in that moment I wasn't thinking about that, hey, I don't have to fly. I was thinking that it's my turn to fly next. It's my duty to fly next. These are the things that I need to do. These are the things that I'm mentally prepared to do, and yet not mentally prepared to carry them out as well as I probably could have. And so, to long answer to your question, but I think the result of it is the thing that I do in the cockpit is I talk. I share. I try to, and maybe Trevor can answer this. Maybe I don't do it as well as I think I do, but I think that I share what's going on in a way to try to decompress the situation. Whether that's something that's going on in my own mind or that's something that's going on in the mission that we're trying to run. So that all of the knowledge, there is no, I have a secret. We all have a vested interest in getting home together safely, and we're not trying. And there's no ego in that. There's a humility and there's a freedom in that says that, hey, if this person sees something that I don't see, I sure would like them to tell me about it before it becomes a problem. And in this particular case, the flight engineer was like, hey boss, you're telling us to let you know if there's a problem. I'm letting you know there's a problem. Why should we even go down that road? And I was really grateful for that. And we had a great flight home. The other guy flew home great. And all of those things that we would have had to deal with, I didn't have to deal with in the same sort of way. So I think that's what I try to do. And maybe Trevor
That's
can say whether or
awesome.
not I do it well.
I also think that what's interesting is we're lucky because we have a pretty set in our mind, like a chain of command, right? Like
Mhm.
it's my turn to fly, and so I'm going to fly, and this is what I'm going to do, and I'm in charge, and I'm the aircraft commander, and this is it. And if something happens, will you guys let me know? And then having that relationship with a subordinate to say, hey man, let's just, like, we're not in war, like we're not like there's no reason, we still get crew rest, we still have crew days, like let's
Right.
just try to follow the rules. And also you have a co-pilot. I think that's really cool. I know in my own experience being in the military as a Navy helicopter pilot, we have operational risk management, ORM,
Mhm.
that we do prior to each flight. I'm sure you guys do that
We did
also,
as
but
well. Yes.
that's why we have to share, kind of thing. Like, did you sleep well last night? Are there how's your like physical health? How's your mental
Yes.
health, kind of thing, just to keep the entire crew safe. But it also sort of does this mandatory check-in, which then sometimes blurs the line of the chain of command because you have as much invested as the other guy does because you're all on the same aircraft in the air flying. So I think it's kind of cool just to sort of talk about that.
Yeah.
Um, and then sometimes you can't compartmentalize. Sorry, compartmentalize.
Yes.
Like the box just keeps opening because it's something that you're not able to still fully understand. So I think that's really cool because it talks to resiliency and talks to grit and it talks to asking for help and also self-care, which is what we're here to talk about. So, can you give us a little bit? And I have like my little cheat sheet of
Yeah.
questions
Yeah.
because we have so much in common. And we could talk for hours. We're on here actually a little bit before we started, and both Javin and I got sort of blown up. Like, aren't you guys supposed to be live now? And we're like, oh shoot, we should go live because we're just chit chatting. But can you give us a brief overview of what about your story or what part of your life led you from military service to community service?
Yeah. It's funny. I was thinking about that, and I think that way, it wasn't really a decision. Like, I don't know how else to say it. I was like, what was it? Was there something that jumped out that said, hey, we're going to stop this and we're going to start this? it was a natural progression. It was a natural flow, and I think some of that was even before the military, in the sense like, hey, and we when we call the military, we call, in short, we call the service, right? Hey, are you in the service? Were you in the service? And so I think that piece was already there. Maybe my mom will chime in and put some things in the chat and say whether that's true or not. But I kind of feel like it was. And so, as we're looking at how chapters were going to end, the military will end it someday, right? You will retire, you will separate. There is, as they say, life after baseball. There is something else that we'll go into. And so I'm grateful that the line just kind of pulls itself. And with specifically to this services, I would say, like, I felt pulled, I felt called into it, like, and I've had this conversation with lots of people, and in my faith and in Christianity and just prayer, I've reminded God, like, hey, I was happy flying airplanes, man. I can fly airplanes. I enjoy it. Some folks think I'm good at it. Like, that's cool. I could continue to do that, and yet the path led here. So there was, with an equal amount of knowingness that moving into this aspect of community service via community health, was the exact same pull that I knew that I was supposed to go to the Air Force Academy and then become a pilot. So, like, it was that. There aren't that many things in my life that I've had that have been that strong where you just know. This was one of those things that I just knew. And unfortunately, the doors have opened to be able to do that, to be able to walk through, just like going to the academy, just like meeting you, on what appeared to have been sort of a random connection. It wasn't. So
Because everything was planned.
everything's planned.
My mom says nothing gets by God's desk. He knows everything that's going to
That's
happen.
right.
It's fate. So let's name the community service. So you are the founder of, sorry, for some reason I just blanked on the name, Shepherd Gate Health. So
Shepherd
can you
Gate,
talk
yeah.
to us about what it is that you're trying, like what the vision is of the organization, and then how you're achieving that vision?
You bet. So Shepherd's Gate Health is a community health organization that works with community stakeholders, namely churches, provides accessible, collaborative, and committed care with the underserved in their communities. And so what that looks like is we look to bring solutions, right, to communities that are often underserved, and be good neighbors, like being invited into that community to assist and help, to listen and observe. And so what that looks like at its full capacity, and we're ramping up, we're getting started. I've been doing this other day job for like 20 years, so we're although I've said we've laid some of the planks, we've built the foundation, we're kind of building the ark before the rain, right? So we're doing those things, but at full capacity, what it looks like is, when we're invited into an organization, we look at three demographics: adults, kids, and seniors, and then the three most prevalent conditions that each of those demographics is struggling with, and launch a 10-year intervention. So at full strength, at any one of our sites, there'll be 9 interventions running at any one given time: 3 for adults, 3 for kids, 3 for seniors. And the sort of the way that we go about figuring that out is where those relationships come from. What is the community saying? Working, one of the reasons that we enjoy working and having the relationships with the churches is, if we go to to the school, then we're really only in the education system. If we just go to the healthcare centers, then we're really only in the healthcare centers. If we just go to industry, then we're really only in industry. But those things crossroad in the pews and in the seats in our houses of worship across our communities and countries. And so as we are there, and as we are invited, and we can ask the questions, hey, what does the community feel like it needs, as we've measured that against what we've expected to find out through health needs assessments and other data that the community, and especially the community health organizations, are required to give as a function of the Affordable Health Care Act, or Obamacare, right? So those things need to be put in writing to let the community know, hey, this is what the hospital thinks we should be doing for you. And so we take that information and we say, okay, this is what the hospital center, this is what the government says that they are going to be doing. Is this what you guys need? And if it is, how can we help you be a part of that solution? And so
Right, not how can we fix it.
Right.
How can we work together with the community to assume that we work together and we fit what you think you need on top of what the research and the data shows and proves. And I think that is the distinction. I think that's very interesting because a lot of organizations go in and say, this is what you need. This is how we're going to fix you.
Yes.
And if you don't like how we're going to fix you, then it's your fault. But what really needs to happen is if we want people to get healthier and you're like, well, just walk outside 30 minutes a day. Well, do they have sidewalks?
Right.
Is it safe to leave their house? Is it safe to leave their bedroom? Like,
Right.
do they have shoes?
Do they have shoes?
Yeah. Do they have, I mean, there's
Yeah.
like a lot of things that you have to think about prior to just telling somebody to go outside and walk and to exercise. And I think that's what's really interesting about our two organizations is, yeah, yoga for change. Not everyone thinks that they need yoga because they can't fathom how they can spend time doing yoga when they can't feed their children, right?
Yeah.
Like I have to work to feed my kids. I don't have time for yoga. I can't pay to go to a yoga studio. Why would I pay? I can't pay for my lights. So I think that's what's really interesting about our organizations is as opposed to here's the Band-Aid to fix your problem. Good luck. We really want to work with the community to see a full, like a holistic way of working together. So how did you identify Jacksonville?
Man, I love this story, and I'll try to make it shorter. So this will be the abridged because it really is a fantastic story, and if we had more time, we would jump into the middle of it. But the short answer is I talked about being invited into communities, and we very much believe that we're invited. We're never going to show up into a community and be like, hey, we've got the answers, as you were saying, because we just don't. I remember when I talked about 99% of stuff I don't even know. So we were invited into the community, and I say Jacksonville, the way we typically say it is Jacksonville said yes before we even asked the question. And it started out with a fantastic relationship with Celebration Church. There were some folks on their staff, Lisa Stewart, who works there, we had a mutual friend and a mutual organization that we both served with here in Washington, D.C. And so I had gotten to know Lisa through that church, and it's actually the church that I still attend here. And we got to sort of know each other. And Shepherd's Gate is a faith-based organization, and so it was like a church, right? A church is a faith-based organization that happens to be a nonprofit as well. And I was like, hey, Lisa, I got questions. Like, how do I do this? What does it look like? How do you raise money? How do you do all of these different things? Recognizing that like the styles will be different, but much of the approach will be the same. And so she helped me answer some of those questions. And as we were talking about like what the organization did, she was like, hey, you know what? We're looking at doing more of that, of doing more involved community-based healthcare aspects. We just don't even know where to begin or where to start. And I said, that's cool because I'm looking to try to do this. I've got some of the ideas, some of the expertise. I did the health administration master's program at George Washington University up here in Washington, D.C., which was sort of the catalyst for the formalization of this when I talk about sort of building the arc. Like military never asked me to learn anything about healthcare as regarding flying, right? So so when speaking with her, she was like, hey, we'd like to sort of try this. What might you know? And would you like to sort of share what you know with us? And I was like, well, yeah, this is the first time out of the chute. So you sure you want to do this with me? Let's do the risk together. And they were already operating in the Grand Park community at a place that had been previously run to an after school program called Metro Kids. And that had been they had been gifted that locations near the Cleveland Arms Apartments. And to continue the work that was already being done there. Celebration had invested there, just volunteering for probably about 7 years before that point where they were even asked to continue the work. And so their team started to do that. And I was able to come alongside and come down to Jacksonville and visit and observe and kind of share. And it became pretty clear that like, yeah, there's some really good things that we can be a partner with. And then from there just began other trips. Again, a lot of fact finding, a lot of understanding. I talked about like we looked at the CHNA, the Community Health Needs Assessments that the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, requires. And what was really interesting was what we saw in the ACA wasn't necessarily what we were seeing on the ground in the Grand Park Cleveland Arms community. which a couple things were encouraging. One, you typically look at youth and some of the preventable conditions, childhood obesity, the growing into type 2 diabetes, those sort of things. And it was surprising that I was surprised just kind of reading like what I expected to see and not seeing that, and seeing more things that were like had to do with adverse childhood exposures and experiences, which was something that in that particular CNA wasn't covered. It is now, and many of the other ones that have since come from that, but in that particular one, it was not. And it became really clear that that was one of the issues. Even just speaking with Matt Jorns, who's the director at the Dream Center there, which was what Metro Kids has become, and they've actually partnered now with the Boys and Girls Club as well. But being able to see and hear and listen and just observe children and the way that they engaged in the things that they were concerned with, and the stories that they would tell, you could see and hear the injects and the things that they were trying to overcome. And so wanting to be able to be involved with that is sort of the why behind Jacksonville, because one, they said yes, and there is a need and a high potential. We often talk about communities like the Grand Park community being at risk, and I think that's and I understand the language behind that, but I think it's a little disingenuous, because at risk makes me think that the follow-on question is at risk of what, and those things are never really followed by like positive ideas, right? It's like, oh, they're at risk of drug use, they're at risk of dropping out of high school, they're at risk of crime, they're at risk of poverty, and all of these things. But being a pilot, we talk a lot about energy management, right? And there's physics behind energy management. And when we talk about energy management, we break that into two types of energy typically, right? So this can be high school physics, right? So we have potential energy and we have kinetic energy. Potential energy is that energy that is stored, that is ready to do something, and then once released becomes kinetic energy and does that thing that the potential energy was designed or pushed into doing. And so when I look, and I'm not coining this, I heard this, but I believe it, is that these communities are either at best at potential or at very high potential. They've not yet turned into the kinetic energy that we've seen because of, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, but because of systematic problems that they've been stunted. But the potential didn't change. The potential is still way up here. And when you talk and when you visit and you go into these communities that you've otherwise been told, hey, you need to be uncomfortable there. It's high crime. It's high poverty. The people are mean and bad.
You have to be like, you and your team have to be, or you have to be uncomfortable there?
Well, anyway, we've been sort of conditioned. I'm saying we as society, we've been conditioned to be uncomfortable. And so since we're conditioned to be uncomfortable, we often don't go. And so we don't know the potential that's there. We only hear about that there isn't, and we don't go and see for ourselves and learn that the families there aren't really any different than any other family. They want the same things for their kids. They want their kids to achieve. They want to deliver a better life. And because of things that have stunted that potential, as the potential energy has become kinetic, if it hits something or it runs into friction, which we also talk about, friction is going to slow down the advancement of that energy, right? And it's going to disperse the energy, often in a way that isn't helpful for anything. And so if we look at these communities and the wonderful individuals that are there and see the high potential that's there, and then learn how do we increase the kinetic, the ability to turn that into kinetic energy while as we did in high school, we often, the formulas worked in high school because we didn't solve for friction, right? We're like, oh, it'll work, like, mass, we would just do all of these things. But life has friction. And so we do need to solve. We can't say, hey, that these systematic problems aren't there, that this friction doesn't exist. You should be able to just do it. I'm just doing it. Well, yeah, man, your path, the kinetic energy that you're on, the potential energy that you have stored didn't hit some of these same bumps and blocks and shortfalls. Other communities do. And
so can you give us like some examples like friction, just so we can define the words so that we all ensure that we're using the same language for this?
So specifically when we're talking about health, and that's kind of what we're still talking about, there's a great term, and it's over 2 decades old, called the social determinants of health. And definitely look that up, folks. It's amazing, and it helps explain so many things. But what falls under that, basically the big picture of social determinants of health, is that 80% of the stuff that you deal with that you go and see the doctor about is as a result of things that don't even take place, that aren't even clinical, that don't even take place or can be solved in the doctor's office. So asthma, asthma is a perfect example. And there's a guy, Rishi Manchada in Los Angeles. He runs an organization called Health Begins. Fantastic TED Talks, great. I follow a ton of his stuff. But he tells a story about he was a doctor in LA, and he tells a story about a woman who came in complaining of asthma for a kid. And so, he did all of these tests, he did all this stuff, and he's like, yeah, sure enough, there's asthma that exists. And talking about inhalers and all of these things. And how do we solve it? But he realized that the problem, that the asthma was different. There was something about this asthma that you're like, this inhaler will treat it, but it's not gonna solve it. And so he worked with a general contractor, got somebody over at the house, and they looked in the house and saw that, yeah, the reason the kid has asthma is because they have poor ventilation and mold. And so they took care of the mold, they took care of the ventilation, and the asthma went away. So, one of the shortfalls that this kid had was because of the housing in which he lived, the availability of the housing, the job market that his mom had, the education that she had, led to certain things that were all friction points that led to his asthma, that led to, that we could easily say, well, it was just asthma or he shouldn't have gotten or whatever. But these things were actual things that contributed to that. And that's one example of many others when it comes to social determinants of health. Access is one. We talk about racism is one. Is what does that look like? Not just in how an individual feels, although there's fantastic studies out of the University of Michigan about what an individual doctor may feel about the level of pain that someone of color may sense versus the level of pain that a majority white member of the society may feel. In short, that the thought was that individual doctors thought that blacks feel less pain, and so they would offer less treatments. There was the way in which education and schooling, because what and how you learn helps in it what you're able to process when it comes to making health decisions. And if the value of the home that you live in or that you're renting isn't necessarily in a fantastic area, then the schools are probably not going to be as good, but the schools also aren't going to be as good because the taxes are lower. And so because the property taxes are lower, the resources aren't available because that's how we allocate in many states and counties and districts. So so there are these things and that carries stress of and we'll talk about that too, but all of these different things are just small building blocks that build upon a system that makes one deal with more friction in their life. So where energy is hit, again, we talked about the energy. When somebody comes out roaring to go, they're 6 years old and they want to grow up and they want to be a pilot. The things that roadblock that or hit that along the way that misdirect them, or it's not even safe. They're where they're supposed to be, doing what they're supposed to be on their way to school, but it's not a safe path on which to walk to school. And how do we do these? How do we work through these? Now, again, Shepherd's Gate Health isn't going to be able to solve all of those, but we're able to work with a community that's seeing them and learn and listen from them and ask them, what are the parts and the pieces that you're seeing these social determinants manifest in your health, and that's where we can jump in and be preventable, because so many of them, especially those things that are preventable, manifest from something else. This is just how we're seeing it. That's not necessarily the cause. Your asthma is not the cause of your problems. The asthma is the manifestation. Diabetes is a manifestation. Cancer is a manifestation. All of these things are manifestations of the things that you are carrying, or the access that you have, or we saw this with COVID. Like, holy cow! Like, I don't mean to go on and on about this, but like,
no, please.
But
please.
we in COVID-19, right? I mean, we all started with COVID-19 at the exact same starting point. Right around January, we start hearing about this thing. Right around February, we start to see it begin to creep into the U.S. society. Right around March, we're all we are overwhelmed and all going into quarantine. We're all moving forward as a society with this together. And then right around April or May, we realize this is not impacting us the way we thought it was. We thought we were all going through this at the exact same things, communities seeing it the exact same way, and not just because of and then we started to see differences, right? That just didn't align geographically. Obviously, if you lived in a rural community in Iowa with maybe 700 people, you were going to have a less likely chance of getting it than if you lived in New York City,
Mm.
right? But the devastation could be equal. It was just not, the
Mm-hmm.
volume was different. And so we're like, okay, well, it's geographic, and so maybe we can open here, maybe we can do this. But then you start to look at, well, let's boil that down. Why is it that communities of color are experiencing this a little bit more? Uh, is it something in their, is it something, in their biology, in their blood? Is it is it something that it makes this more deadly or more attractive? Um, and you go, well, maybe. But the thing that we also know is we're really, I don't know, and I want to applaud our health care workers. I want to applaud
Yes.
our frontline workers, our first responders, our EMTs, our folks working in Amazon. And I want to give a shout out to all of the folks that kept the Wi-Fi going. I don't know what this would have looked like if
Yeah.
if the utility companies did not keep Wi-Fi up. But what we do know is, and this is example even in Grand Park, is many of the folks that we were asking and that we just applauded were folks that could not commute from home, because I needed them to be at the restaurant
Mm.
trying to fix the burgers. I needed them to be on the metro to ensure that those that were going to work could still get to work. I needed them to be in the parking garages so that the doctors who pulled in to take care of the COVID patients had availability to do that. And the patients that were coming and standing outside felt safe, that the police officers that were on the street trying to ensure that only those that needed to be at the hospital and security guards were there, right? Um, so many of those, the bar, or not the bars, but the liquor stores that needed to stay open, all of these places, so many of the convenience stores, so many of them are manned and operated by persons of color who are
Yes.
often from lower income communities. And so in the middle of a pandemic, we did sort of a Hunger Games. We said, your tribute. Like,
Mm.
I have a good job and I can telecommute. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to create space so that you can run my Instacart, so that you can do these things, which is all fantastic. And I'm glad that we had those opportunities. I'm glad that we had them even with Amazon. But we wouldn't be disingenuous to say that we didn't ask a certain segment of community, whether it was racially based, or economically based. And often in those cases, the economics and the racial components line up to say, hey, you guys are going to go be the tributes for us during this pandemic. And hopefully, and we're going to really pray for you. We're going to really support you, but you're going to be the ones that put your lives on the line, and which means you're going to be more exposed. Again, you look at a single mom who typically is working two jobs and
Right.
has to work those two jobs in order to make rent and to make food happen for her family, now has to go on a bus that has decreased the number of routes that it's going to run, because we've asked them to do that because of COVID-19. And
Yeah.
so in the decreasing of the routes, that means we've run less buses, which means they're going to be more crowded, which means she's going to have to be there earlier and spend more time exposed, because she can't afford to miss that bus and be late to work. Because if she's
And
late
she
to
has to
work,
be a teacher now.
and she
And
has to
by
be
the
a
way, you
teacher
have to
now,
be a teacher now. Single moms.
single mom, dividing all of her already duties. Oh, and by the way,
Right.
she's already exhausted. And
Yeah.
so she have to pick up another shift here and there to cover for somebody else who isn't able to make it because of something that's going on with their home, and a single mom, or friend. And oh, and by the way, she doesn't have the money to do the childcare because the schools were
Right.
taking care of the kids.
Right.
And none of that is now happening. And so we've asked her, hey, can you be at a little bit more risk? And so of course it shouldn't be surprising that she gets hit with COVID-19. Oh, and because of the already social determinants that we've previously talked about,
Right.
with access, she hasn't had those things previously treated, those underlying conditions that she was aware of but didn't want to say anything about, because she needed to get through them. She couldn't knock off work and be out for 4 days to get to wait for an appointment. Well, those things all come to the surface because COVID-19 doesn't care. Um, and so when we battle those things, when we ask people to put themselves in line, when we give $600 in extra bonuses to help people stay home with unemployment, to encourage them not to go to work, it's so that we don't. People are not working now because they don't want to. We need to ask people not to work because it's not safe to. And the people that we're asking to go are those that are most vulnerable and can't say no. So perhaps maybe we can help them out a little bit and encourage them to have the same choices that the rest of us do. And so because I'll tell you, they haven't had those choices yet. And so it's kind of nice to be able to say, hey, you know what? I'm asking a whole lot of you.
Yeah.
Maybe we can ask a little bit less to keep you safe.
I never heard that explanation as to why people of color are being hit a lot harder by COVID-19. Just saying, like, because we're asking them to be a tribute. Like um I've never heard that. And so that really, that like hit my
Mm,
central nervous system. Because I do know that the Amazon delivery people that do come to our neighborhood to deliver our Amazon packages are people of color. Like I go out and say thank you every, like, just a personal thing, just because also it's,
yeah. Because
you know,
you're
it's,
good people.
well, no, but also just because I had never, well, because I mean, I say thank you for you are an essential worker, right? Like when I go
Yeah.
through the teller line at the bank to deposit money, like I write a little note and said, thank you for being an essential worker to keep my business
Yes.
running, kind of thing, right? And so I
Yes.
think that is a way of putting it, because um I have attempted to figure out why individuals, people of color are being hit more because of COVID. And there's been a lot of talk about it because another thing that I've heard is African American men are not going to wear face masks when they go into, like, they're not going to wear face masks when they go into places or locations because there's racism in Florida, like where I live. And so
We can
there's a
talk
lot
about
of
that
other
too.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like that's where, and I was like, that one makes a lot of sense. But
Yeah.
even the way you talked about it, because there is a study, I don't know who, maybe you know where it's by, but they did a pretty nationwide study where they had African American men and Caucasian men with very similar resumes with the same zip code apply for the same jobs. And African American men who had no criminal record and Caucasian men who had no criminal record, Caucasian men were hired hands down over African American men. And then they did the same study where they gave the Caucasian men a record, like a criminal record, a criminal history record, and the African American men had no criminal record, and still the Caucasian men were hired over the African American men. So there was a way to look at that study and then apply it to your reasoning, stating that a lot of these jobs that don't require high education or are kind of like the low barrel jobs, if you will, right? The minimum paying jobs.
Mhm.
That's why African American, people of color are going for that, because we have a system that is kind of based, and the Constitution is, race. It's very racist in the way that it's hiring practices. It may not be on purpose, but it may be the hiring agent is looking at two people and he would rather hire a white guy as opposed to a person of color, right? And so then when you get down to like delivery drivers and Amazon drivers, I just think it's a very interesting way of putting it that we have asked them to continue to work because we have been ordering off of Amazon, and it doesn't, who are those delivery people? So thank you, I think, for
Yeah.
really just putting it really clearly. There is a question that I kind of want to get to, which may or
Yeah.
may not be on topic of what we're talking about right now, but what are some of the needs that you have co-identified with the communities where you are serving or have served? And what projects have developed around the meeting of needs of those people in areas of health?
Can you read that one more time, just a little slower?
Yeah, I totally, yeah. Sorry, two questions. Okay. What are some of the needs that you have co-identified with the communities where you have served or are serving?
Mhm.
And what projects have developed around meeting the needs in those areas of health? This is from Tamara.
Okay. So, great question. I would say some of the needs, again, one of the things that we are jumping into, and part of one of the things our board is looking at in the wake of COVID-19, um, excuse me, are what are how are we going to change and adapt to meet some of those needs that we are identifying.
Mm,
So, as I said, we look at the three demographics: adults, kids, and seniors, and then look at the three most prevalent conditions. So with kids, as I said, we're talking about adverse childhood experiences, and that was clearly a need. That was a need that we saw from being on the ground and talking with people.
mhm,
Um, but now we're starting to also look at, hey, what are some of the other things that we could do with kids, but also how do we branch out and to look at some of the things that we were doing with adults and seniors. And so for seniors, one of the things that we saw, and we're doing more research into this now, but was a really interesting thing was, there's a lot of organizations that provide access for seniors to get to appointments, right? Like
mm,
oftentimes we're like, hey, the seniors will make an appointment, but they're not able to go either because they didn't have somebody that could take them, or it was too far away, or just different things. Um, but some of the things also that seniors are involved with, or that makes it difficult, is for them to maintain their regiment, their treatment regimen, simply because they can't open the pill bottle because of arthritis or certain things, right? Like that is an actual thing that is often overlooked, right? And so As we were looking at, we got to that because we were looking previously like falls prevention. What does it look like to do a very easy thing? You can come in with contractors, you can come in with community health workers, of which we're creating a great relationship right now. I want to give a shout out to our community health workers, and I'm going to speak to that in just one second. But as we were looking towards what does it look like to do a falls prevention, we started talking. We had a conversation with a woman who who's she's like, yeah, I mean, I've fallen down before, and that's a problem, but that wasn't as much of a problem as after I fell down, I couldn't take my medication to help me with the pain because I couldn't open the bottle. And we're like, whoa,
There's a lot going. Yeah, there's so much we need
there's
to.
so
Yeah.
much. But another one is just expanding what are some of the things that we can do with COVID-19 specifically, because that often does hit communities of color and adults in that. And so how can we, I did just a thing in Jacksonville. Where are the COVID centers? Where are the COVID testing centers? Where could I go right now if I want to do testing and tracing, right? I can tell you where you can't go. Don't go to Cleveland Arms. Don't go to Grand Park. Don't go to Moncrief. Like, don't go to those places because you're not going to find it. And so by working with our community health needs, community health workers, and trying to be partners with them in the community to provide those things, because one of the things that states are doing, Florida's doing it, California's doing it, states are trying to work with folks who have been laid off or have lost their job as a result of COVID-19, and how do we train them to be contact tracing workers, which is fantastic. It's a great idea, except that there's already millions of people out there, that there's already an army that's hidden inside of our communities that are already poised and positioned to do that because they've been building the relationships for decades. And those are the community health workers. They're kind of, think of them as a liaison, as a partner between the health community, so the hospital itself, a social worker, and the person that's in the community. They balance and bridge those, so they can they're comfortable walking into a barbershop and sharing information. They're just as comfortable as going into a school or going into an after school program, or just knocking on doors and trained with the information on how to learn and build trust. And again, trust is one of those things, and this is a little bit different, but to also answer Tamara's question, is building trust is key. There's been, especially in communities of color, and especially in low income communities, there have been so many programs and so many studies that either came in where they came in, had a great idea, got their research and left, or came in and did harmful things. And it really doesn't matter whether you came in and you did something that was harmful, or you did something that was only self-seeking. Either way, you've broken trust with the community. And if you come back to harm, they're going to shun you and not let you in. If you came back to do something self-serving, then they may give you the opportunity to say hello, but they're not going to support they're not going to support your work, and you're not going to get any benefit. And the whole point of studying communities, especially right now, when drug trials are going to be huge for COVID-19.
Yes.
And you're probably aware of the history of drug trials. Our audience isn't aware of the history of drug trials. Predominantly in the U.S., probably up until about the 1990s, most of drug trials were done on white males. And part of that reason is, especially one of the funniest ones was a drug that was being tested to be used to help pregnant women.
Right.
The FDA said, hey, you can't test that on pregnant women because that would be unethical. That would be harmful to their fetus. That would be harmful to the baby that they're carrying, and we don't know what it'll do to their hormonal balance. You cannot test that on women who are pregnant. You're like, reason sounds fair. Where can I get a group of people? Well, hey, these dudes aren't going to be pregnant. We'll see if this thing works on them. Let's adjust our balances and our levels. And you're like, I can understand that, except that's not helping to determine whether or not that drug is going to be effective for those women. Right. And as we learn more about medicines, we learn more about people, as we study the genome and do all of these different things, and the genetics of what happens when a drug is introduced into your body. People are individual.
Right.
People's, like, race is a thing that we've created in our mind. And in our society, but 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 traits are real. Like there are just some traits that you have, that I have as a black man that you don't have as a white woman. There's traits that you have as a white woman that I don't have as a black man. And it'd be really helpful if we knew that the medication that we're taking or the vaccine is going to behave in the way in which it was designed. And the only way to know that is to test it on people, who are going to be in that group.
Right.
And so, but how do I encourage folks in communities of color to trust me when I say, hey, I'm going to do this test, when you've only come through before and done things that were harmful with, for example, Tuskegee experiment, and not the airmen, they're awesome, but but the syphilis experiment,
Yes.
and then only done things that were self-serving, where we came in,
Right.
we left, we got our research, and then didn't stick around to help. So I hope that was an answer to that question. What are we doing? In short, we're identifying places, especially like with COVID, where we can be involved with adults, but also, and for our communities at large, but also what can we do to help develop and build and really be a steward of the trust that we're trying to build. Because we, as you said, I'm from Washington, D.C. We were invited in Jacksonville. We're super excited to be in Jacksonville. We want to be there, and we are there, and we're grateful. But I also know that in many of the instances that I've had, I'm seen as an outsider. And so I have to do the legwork. Talking with you, you've been doing work in Jacksonville for so long and been able to introduce me and bring me in. And I know that I'm trading on your currency when I do that. You're vouching for me that this dude's not crazy, and he's not here to hurt anybody, and he's not here for selfish ambition. And so to make good on that, not only for you and your credibility, but also for our community, and to say, and that's why we say, hey, we're here for our interventions are 10 years long. And after 10 years, we're not just going to pick up stakes and move. Our hope is that whatever that was that we were dealing with in 10 years, there's a community sustaining solution. And now we can move on to whatever was number 4 on the list. We're not leaving after 10 years. We're just hoping that we don't have to do that one intervention anymore. And we'll move on to the next one, or we'll reset that one and do that one better. But it is an investment. It's a long-term investment in the communities which we are invited to be a part of.
Speaking of the intervention, what is the most important need that you witnessed that these at-risk communities need and are lacking? Ask again. What are the most important need? What is the most important need that you have witnessed that these at-risk communities need and are lacking?
That's a fantastic question. And every day I'm talking, and you've had an opportunity to talk with Jelani Allison.
That's Jelani's question.
Is that Jelani's question?
Yes.
Jelani, that's funny, because I was gonna push that question here. Well, here's gonna be my answer. Is I was actually writing down that question. I didn't even know it was his. I was writing down that question because I was gonna say, hey, I've been working and talking with this phenomenal young man named Jelani Allison.
Yes.
And Jelani has opened my eyes to more of what is going on in Jacksonville and in a number of communities. The vast majority of my attention has been placed in the Cleveland Arms neighborhood in Grand Park and Washington Heights district. He has shown me communities or spoken to me about communities like Hilltop and Moncrief and just numerous other ones that are so similar, that it's so funny that he asked that. They're so similar that I was not even yet exposed to. Right. And so to answer his question is, I'm still every day, and every time we talk, you show me something new. And so when I think of, hey, what are the most critical things, I can only say right now, is because we've put more research and more interest into it, or not interest, that's not the right word, more attention into it, is has to do with youth and adverse childhood experiences. And the reason why I say that is because you can walk around any of these communities and you can see the future, both changed and unchanged. You can see an unchanged future when I talk to a 5-year-old at the Dream Center and have an amazing conversation with him, and then have to pause in the middle of a conversation when he's sharing experiences and realize that he's not 30. And then drive down the street a bit and see guys that are only 5 years old or 7 years older than them, that are preteens, that are 12 and 13 years old, and recognize that things left unchanged is where this kid's going to be. And then drive a little further down. And one of the really cool things I got to do there was, and I love doing this in the communities that we get invited to, is I go get a haircut. I go to the barbershop and I hang out because you learn a ton about a community of
Yeah.
barbershop. But in being there, being able to talk to and see what's going well in the community, see what the struggles and the things that make people frustrated, and then walk outside the community and see guys that are my age, that that whose dreams had hit too much friction, and they are not doing that thing that you knew that they were called to do. They're doing that thing that they are doing, which may be standing outside of a liquor store, talking about how they wish that they could change, or how they are settling into the reality that they're in. Either way, unchanged, that is my 5-year-old. That's the kindergartner's reality. And then when he turns 60, having that mindset of going, hey, we need to do something different for these kids, but not having had the opportunity to see what it looks like to have done something different and to see how that plays out. And so what I love about Johnny, and Johnny, I'm going to use your term here because this is what you teach me. And when it comes to the number one thing, is when it comes to preventing those things, is sowing seeds of truth. And Jelani's term is ghetto seeds still grow. It doesn't matter where you're planted. It doesn't matter what the environment is around you. That seed will grow. And so our organization is looking to the Bible has a parable about where seeds fall. Some seed falls on dry dirt and it's picked up and it never has an opportunity to plant. Other seed is thrown amongst the weeds and it's choked out. Other seed is thrown on a rocky soil and the birds come and pluck it and take it away. And then other seed is sown on good soil and it has an opportunity to take root and it grows and it multiplies and it yields a harvest that is even 100 times more than what we could have ever hoped for or imagined. And providing the soil, the good soil, in which those seeds, though we might look at them as at risk, but what we know about a seed is we take a seed and we put it in the ground and we bury it, and we don't, and for all intents and purposes, when it comes to dreams, if you take a dream and you bury it, that dream's probably never going to have anything happen to it.
Right.
But when we do it with intentionality, when we water it, when we put it in good, nutritious and nutrient-rich soil, we can plant a seed and then we just give it a little bit of time. And that seed will begin to take roots and it'll spring roots. And then we'll see a little sprout grow. And we know that something is happening at work. And even that sprout has more in it has more potential in it than the seed did to begin with. And it's changing its energy state to the point where it grows, we can harvest it, and we can feed a lot of people from it. We can pour into a lot more. And then what's really cool about seed is there's some left over, and there's an old term, and I use it a lot, that we're into the seed corn. The seed corn was that seed that was set aside for harvesting the next generation, for harvesting in that next season. But it came out of that first batch that we ate. We got so much more. And so I think that we can be ready for the harvest. We can plant the seeds now and not give up the idea that we can't do this again, because
Right.
we're gonna have seed corn left over. And so what part of the biggest issues are changing language. It's hard to do, and it's not even changing culture. That's really hard to do. But changing language in the sense that we see communities with potential. We see them for
Right.
the harvest grounds that they are. And even if they have rocky soil, okay, that's fine. We come in and we do some work, and then the crows
Right.
won't come and eat it. If there's weeds, well, cool. We can deal with weeds. We can bring in some Roundup. We can get in the garden and do some work and get those weeds out, because the idea is to protect the seed.
Right.
And I think, especially with youth, we can do that. With adults and seniors, they want to be able to do that. They know what it looks like. They've walked the path. And so we can do those things. And so much of that is with the kids, but much of it, again, is with the adults and the seniors. And again, we're just going to try and do our part to be good neighbors, and to steward and harvest and prepare ground well.
And I think it's what's really interesting too. What you said is talking to a 5-year-old. I used to teach a lot of elementary school kids, the summer before like third grade is usually like after third grade. For me, kids are still nice to each other in
Yes,
second
yes,
grade. And so third grade is like when they start realizing like they don't have to be nice all the time, at least in my experience, where I've been teaching. But looking at a second grader and knowing that like no second grader, when they ask what do you want to be when you grow up, like nobody says, I want to be a sex worker, or I want to be addicted to heroin, or
right.
I want to be homeless, right? Nobody as a second grader says that. They have these highs open dreams. And so what happens, like what that friction that you talked about, what happens that makes them their path sort of switch or
Yes,
shift into something that they never wanted to be or they never thought they would be, right? And so I think what we're doing, what you as Shepherd Grade Health is also doing, is we're giving people resources so that they can come and still achieve what they want to achieve. It may not be in the time frame that they thought possible, but we're giving them hope that they actually are strong enough, right,
yes,
to change potentially their current actions, not their past actions, their current actions, so that they can then maintain whatever outcome they're hopeful to attain. And so I think that that's
absolutely.
really interesting.
Amen.
You talk about that 5-year-old little boy and then working with adults and seniors. And in order to truly affect a community, you can't just, there's no sweeping change, right? You don't just give a pill and
Right.
everyone shifts. It's work, and there's a lot of work that goes into it. And I also love the fact that you talked about, going into the barbershop and actually sitting down and hearing what's the scuttlebutt or what's going on around town, right? And being a part of their community, as opposed to coming in a business suit and then leaving and then coming
Yes.
back 6 months later for your outcome test, right? Like
Yeah.
that's a little different. So I just really appreciate the way that you holistically look at the community and what you're bringing. It's already been an hour.
Oh,
And so
wow.
I looked at the time, like, I don't know what your schedule's like, but I know that we have some final wrap up things. One
Sure.
more thing though that I just wanted to see and ask you is, I know you look at 10-year models, but
Mhm.
where do you see Shepherd's Gate Health growing in the next 5 years?
Good question. Um, so I'll say it. I'll use another parable that I like real quick. So the parable of the Good Samaritan, right? It's for those that are following along. It's in Luke chapter 10. And basically what happens, and Martin Luther King actually uses this in his last speech, in the mountaintop speech. He talks about this too. So Google that, because it's phenomenal. So none of this is original. All of this is just the way that I've laid this onto my life, and how I choose to see it going forward. Um, but being in it, basically what happens in that story is there's a guy that's beat up, and he's thrown into a ditch. Some robbers and muggers and everybody just come. He runs into friction of life, and he's thrown into the ditch. And then some very important people, three sets of very important people, walk by. People that should have means, or should have the ability or their awareness to help this guy out, don't. And perhaps they have valid reasons for it. Perhaps they're on their way to a really important meeting, or perhaps one of them is a very religious guy, and he knows the law, and if he engages with this guy, that he's going to be unclean. He's not going to be able to engage in the ceremonial things that he needs to do. Either way, not helping my buddy in the ditch, right? So, but then this guy turns up. He's not from their culture. He's a Samaritan. These were Jewish guys. Um, he doesn't know a whole lot about what's going on in the area, but he has a couple of things. He has the desire to help, so he kneels down and just checks this guy out, and he sees that he's in a rough state. So he picks him up and he throws him on his donkey, and he takes him to an inn, and he tells the innkeeper, hey, this is all the money that I've got right now, but if you can put him up, if you can just take care of him for the next 2 weeks, I'll be back, and whatever's left to be settled, we'll take care of it. We'll settle it. And so the parable ends where Christ asks, hey, who was being more of a neighbor to this guy? And the person that asked the question said, well, it was the Samaritan, who was being more of a neighbor. We look back at that in hindsight, and that seems pretty normal. If we look at it in the context of the time, that seems very abnormal. And we actually we've seen that sort of thing even in our own country. Take the shootings in Charleston, for example, when Dylan Ruth went into that church and shot the people. It was really abnormal that they later forgave him, that they said anything redeeming about him at all. Is the same sort of picture that's painted in this parable. And so when I look in the next 5 years, I know even just over the brief history that Shepherd's Gate's had over the last couple of years is sometimes we're going to come on the scene and we're going to have partners
Right.
and no resources.
Yep.
Um, I know on other times we're going to come onto the scene and we're going to have resources and no partners.
Mm.
And so we're going to be actively engaging into the communities to try and find those who are willing to come alongside us to help our buddies that have hit the friction of life and feel like they're in the ditch. And so in the next 5 years, I believe that we're going to have a network of organizations like yours and other organizations in Jacksonville, um, that help us to be able to do that work on behalf of the community. Churches that we're able to be sort of our eyes and ears and let us know how are we doing with the folks that we're trying to serve. I think about the church that I grew up in on the west side of Chicago, and I contrast that with the church that I go to now. Church
Mm.
that I grew up in was a smaller church. Probably, on any given day you'd walk in there, maybe there was about 50 people. Um, in a lower income community with people that were just on fire. The church that I go to now is about 3,500 people, still on fire. Different means, different abilities.
Right.
We in our larger church, we work very hard to make our large 3,500 member church. Again, your face was like, "Oh, wow, that's big." We
Yeah,
work
that's
very
gonna be.
hard to make that church feel small
Mhm.
by feeling small groups and making people feel like that you didn't just show up to church to go on a Big Ten campus and now you're just a number. Like
Mm.
you are involved. Um, in the smaller church, we didn't have to do that. And what was really cool was we did some things to try to make ourselves feel bigger. But what was really cool about the small church is not only did the pastor know everybody in the congregation, but he knew what was going on in the lives of nearly everybody that lived within 8 blocks of the church, whether or not they ever darkened the door.
Mm.
Um, I was talking to one of the pastors that's there now. The church is called Keystone Baptist. It's in Chicago, and the guy who leads, one of the pastors that leads it now, co-leads it, was there when we grew up together. We were kids in that church together, and he was just sharing about a guy that did come by and had never once darkened the door and was like, "Hey, what do you guys do here?" And it was just neat that even in that sense, he knew he could find out what was going on in that guy's life. And so when I look at what we're doing in the next 5 years, I see that we're probably going to be also invited into some other communities besides Jacksonville. There's been communities that have approached us in Chicago and in Memphis and in and around the Birmingham, Alabama area, to grow and expand. But we won't do those growths and expansions unless what we're doing already in the community that we've already invested in is growing and harvesting those seeds and moving from potential energy into kinetic energy and reducing the number of friction points that stop people from the harvest in which that they are ready to receive and to be a part of. And so there's a lot of work. That's a lot of labor. That's a lot of intensity over the next 5 years. And so, but I think that the support's there. The relationships that we've already garnered, especially in the Jacksonville area, give me hope and belief that the work is possible, and we know that it's rewarding, but that we will accomplish that. And so, in 5 years' time, if we're having a conversation, I'd be excited to be talking about, hey, these are the 9 interventions that are up and running at this location in Jacksonville. These are the things these are the impacts that we're seeing in the community. These are the sustaining things that, hey, you know what? We actually stopped doing one of the interventions because the community already solved that problem ahead of time.
Right.
These are
Right.
the next things that we're looking into. What is it? We're talking, and I'm just briefly. We've been exploring what might it look like to address the ideas of food deserts. I know that's a big thing, but a life story. My family, my dad's side of the family moved up from Holly Springs, Mississippi to Chicago during the Great Migration. Folks that are out there aren't aware of the Great Migration, definitely read about the Great Migration. If you cannot understand the United States and the makeup that it is right now, you will never understand the social determinants of health if you don't understand the Great Migration, which is basically a massive refugee movement of Black Americans moving from Jim Crow South to find something better in the United States.
Right.
And so But when they moved up, they had a tradition of sharecropping, and so they moved into a community that if you move to where they went to in Chicago, it would absolutely qualify as a food desert, and yet wasn't a problem for them because you know what? We know how to farm some stuff. Like we know how to grow our own food, and we can do that and help with with not only our immediate family but all the cousins in the caravan that we brought up with us, and those folks that aren't cousins that are neighbors. Because again, when we plant one seed, we get an abundant harvest, and we can do things and share. And I and the dream about what might it look like. Farmers markets are pretty cool. People love going to farmers markets. They're pretty trendy. They're upscale. What would it look like that to be able to have one of the coolest farmers markets be at Cleveland Arms, um, with people coming in and spending more money in a community in which they have some of the freshest food and create some of the most incredible knickknacks and snacks and candles and honey and whatever it is they want to make that is being done, or whatever it is that they want to make in their apartments, to do that and sell. So there's some big things that we dream about. None of those are yet realities, but again, we got to take the dream, we got to put it in the ground and let it grow. And so maybe I can't wait to report back in 5 years. But
Hopefully in 5 years there'll be the Cleveland Arms Farmers Market. I mean, you heard it here first, folks. I think it's interesting. We have done Yoga for Changes and programming with both the children, but also we do a lot of programming with incarcerated individuals, and a lot of the incarcerated individuals, because we were offering community classes at Cleveland Arms for many years.
Yes.
They had a change in management, so we no longer offer classes there. But a lot of the incarcerated individuals that we were working with were either from the Cleveland Arms or surrounding neighborhood of that area in Jacksonville. And so I think bringing like a farmer's market, just thinking outside the box sometimes is a pretty good place to start when you're trying to solve, years of decades of problems. Because the status quo obviously hasn't worked out so well.
Status quo is not working, and so we'll go where we can. We'll dream what we will, and then plant and then be excited together about what changes.
Yeah. Well, Javin, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for all your time. I really, really appreciate it. Shepherd's Gate Health, please look them up. It's shepherdsgatehealth.org. So shepherdsgatehealth.org, one word. Please do look at them, and if you're look them up, and if you're interested, reach out. Javin's been amazing contact for me to have, and I really do appreciate him. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to our YouTube station. It just helps us, and we don't really flood your inbox. We just give you yoga tools and techniques, and there's lots of classes and other interviews like this one. Again, my name is Catherine Thomas. I'm the Executive Director of Yoga for Change. Any final words before we sign off here?
Catherine, no, just thank you again for the opportunity. Thank you again for your friendship, for your partnership, and for the work that we are excited to do at Shepherd's Gate with you and with Yoga for Change as we go forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And we will see you all later.